Colonel Marcus Henderson had seen it all in his 32 years of military service. From the dusty battlefields of Afghanistan to the polished corridors of the Pentagon, nothing surprised him anymore. At 64, he carried himself with the steady composure that came from decades of command, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his uniform always pristine. Today was supposed to be just another routine visit to the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Denver, Colorado. The autumn morning was crisp as Marcus walked through the hospital's main entrance, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He was there for his monthly appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, a routine checkup that had become part of his life since retiring from active duty 5 years ago. The waiting room was filled with the usual mix of veterans from different eras, some young, some old, all carrying their own invisible wounds. Marcus took his customary seat near the window, where he could watch the mountains in the distance. He pulled out his reading glasses and opened the morning newspaper, settling into the familiar rhythm of waiting. The hospital bustled around him with the quiet efficiency he had always admired about medical facilities. "Colonel Henderson?" a soft voice called out. He looked up to see a young woman in scrubs standing near the reception desk. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes that seemed older than her years. There was something about her posture that caught his attention, the way she stood straight, with a subtle military bearing that most civilians wouldn't notice. "I'm Rachel Santos, Dr. Chen's new physician assistant," she said, approaching him with a warm smile. "Dr. Chen is running about 10 minutes behind schedule. Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee or water?" Marcus shook his head politely. "No, thank you, Miss Santos. I'm fine waiting." He studied her face for a moment, feeling an odd sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. "Have we met before? You seem familiar." Rachel's smile faltered slightly, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't think so, sir. Though I've heard a lot about you from the other staff. They speak very highly of your service." Something in her tone made Marcus pay closer attention. There was a weight to her words, a careful distance that seemed practiced. As she turned to walk back to the desk, the collar of her scrubs shifted slightly, revealing just a glimpse of something dark on her neck. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Even from across the room, even with only a partial view, he recognized what he was seeing. It was impossible, yet there it was, the distinctive outline of an eagle, wings spread wide, with something clutched in its talons. His hand instinctively moved to his own neck, where beneath his uniform shirt lay the exact same image. The newspaper slipped from his hands as memories flooded back, unbidden and overwhelming. Afghanistan, 2008. The small outpost near Kandahar where his unit had been stationed. The night that changed everything. His throat felt tight as he remembered the faces of his soldiers, so young and brave, and among them. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice slightly hoarse. Rachel turned back toward him, and this time he saw something flicker across her expression, recognition, perhaps, or fear. "Could I have that water after all?" She nodded and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Marcus alone with his racing thoughts. He tried to focus on the logical explanations. Lots of people had eagle tattoos. Military symbolism was common among veterans. It was probably just a coincidence, his mind playing tricks on him after all these years. But as Rachel returned with a plastic cup of water, walking with that same controlled gait he remembered from the soldiers under his command, Marcus knew it wasn't his imagination. When she handed him the cup, their fingers briefly touched, and he noticed the small scar on her index finger, barely visible, but there nonetheless. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice steadier than he felt. Rachel lingered for a moment, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that confirmed his suspicions. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Were you ever stationed at Forward Operating Base Lightning? in Kandahar province?" The cup nearly slipped from Marcus's hands. Fob lightning. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, though it had echoed in his dreams more nights than he cared to count. He looked at Rachel, really looked at her, and suddenly the familiar feeling made perfect sense. The young woman standing before him had been there that night. She had been one of his soldiers, though she looked so different now without the helmet and tactical gear, without the dust and exhaustion that had marked all their faces during that deployment. But the eyes were the same, determined, haunted, carrying secrets that only those who had been there could understand. "Santos," he said slowly, the name finally clicking into place. "Corporal Elena Santos, combat medic, 3rd Platoon." Her composure finally cracked, and tears began to form in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, glancing around to make sure no one was watching their exchange. "I go by Rachel now, sir. It's my middle name." She took a shaky breath. "I never thought I'd see you again. After what happened that night, after the investigation, I didn't think any of us would ever—" "Colonel Henderson?" Dr. Chen's voice interrupted them from across the waiting room. "I'm ready for you now." Marcus stood up slowly, his mind reeling from the encounter. He looked at Rachel one more time, seeing not the confident medical professional, but the young soldier who had saved lives under enemy fire, who had been willing to sacrifice everything for her fellow troops. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Rachel nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "I get off shift at 6. There's a coffee shop called Mountain View about 2 blocks from here." As Marcus followed Dr. Chen toward the examination rooms, he felt the familiar weight of his tattoo against his chest, the symbol that had bound him to a group of soldiers who had shared something no one else could understand. After 15 years of silence, the past had found him in the most unexpected place. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Marcus arrived at 6:15 that evening. He had spent the afternoon trying to focus on other things, but his mind kept drifting back to that night 15 years ago. Rachel was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, old habits from their military days. She had changed out of her scrubs into civilian clothes, but she still carried herself like a soldier. Marcus ordered a black coffee and joined her at the table. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, both lost in memories neither had spoken about in years. "You look good, Santos," Marcus finally said. "Different, but good. How long have you been working at the hospital?" "Almost 3 years now," Rachel replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I finished my medical training about 5 years ago. Turns out all that field medicine experience was good for something." She managed a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What about you? Still active duty?" Marcus shook his head. "Retired 5 years ago. Mandatory retirement age caught up with me eventually." He paused, studying her face. "Elena, Rachel, I've thought about that night so many times. About all of you. I tried to find out what happened to everyone after the investigation, but we all scattered to the wind," Rachel finished. "That was probably for the best, sir. What we did, what we had to do, it was better if we didn't stay in contact." The weight of unspoken memories hung heavy between them. Marcus reached for his collar, slowly unbuttoning the top button of his shirt to reveal the edge of his tattoo. Rachel's eyes widened as she saw the familiar design. "You still have yours, too?" she observed, touching her own neck unconsciously. "Never considered having it removed," Marcus said. "It felt like dishonoring their memory, somehow." Rachel nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She glanced around the coffee shop once more, then carefully pulled down the collar of her sweater to show Marcus the complete tattoo that had stopped him cold earlier that day. It was identical to his own, an eagle with wings spread wide, clutching not the traditional olive branch and arrows, but a single red cross in its talons. 7 of us got these, she said quietly. You, me, Sergeant Williams, Corporal Davis, Private First Class Johnson, Specialist Rodriguez, and— her voice caught. And Tommy. Private Martinez. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the faces clearly in his mind. Tommy was so young, 19 years old. He should have been home playing video games and going to college parties. Instead, he was saving lives, Rachel said firmly. They all were. We all were. The memories came flooding back to both of them, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Forward Operating Base Lightning, a small outpost in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. It was supposed to be a routine patrol that night, check on a village that had reported suspicious activity, but routine patrols didn't exist in that part of the world. The IED hit the lead vehicle about 2 clicks out from base, Marcus said, his voice distant with memory. Sergeant Williams and his team were trapped. The radio chatter. I can still hear it. Rachel nodded. 3 wounded, 1 critical. Williams had shrapnel in his leg, couldn't walk. Davis had a concussion, and Rodriguez— She swallowed hard. Rodriguez was bleeding out from a piece of metal that had gone through his abdomen. What happened next violated every rule of engagement, every protocol in the military handbook. The area hadn't been secured. Air support was 20 minutes out. Standard procedure was to wait for backup, to establish a perimeter, to follow the chain of command. But Specialist Rodriguez was dying. You made the call, Rachel said, looking directly at Marcus. As the commanding officer, you ordered us to break protocol, to go after them immediately. Marcus remembered the weight of that decision, how it had felt like the longest moment of his life. He had 6 soldiers under his command at the base that night: Rachel, Johnson, Martinez, and 3 others who chose not to join the rescue mission. The smart choice, the safe choice, would have been to wait. I gave you all the option to stay behind, Marcus said. I made it clear that anyone who came with me was doing so against direct orders from higher command, that if things went wrong, we'd all face court-martial. And 4 of us chose to come anyway, Rachel replied. Johnson didn't even hesitate. He grabbed his gear and was at the vehicle before anyone else. Martinez was right behind him, even though it was his first month in country. The rescue mission had been successful, but barely. They had reached the disabled vehicle under heavy enemy fire, with Rachel providing medical care while the others laid down covering fire. She had managed to stabilize Rodriguez enough for transport, though it had taken every bit of her medical training and some improvisation that would have horrified her instructors back in medical school. But success had come at a cost. The unauthorized rescue mission had saved 3 lives, but it had also resulted in an investigation that nearly destroyed all their careers. Marcus had faced the possibility of court-martial for disobeying orders and putting his soldiers at unnecessary risk. The others faced charges for following an unlawful command. The hearing lasted 3 weeks, Marcus recalled. I was prepared to take full responsibility. I knew what I was asking you all to do when I made that call. But we all testified that we made the choice ourselves, Rachel said. We weren't following orders that night, sir. We were following our conscience. The investigation had eventually been dropped, largely due to the testimony of Sergeant Williams and the other soldiers they had rescued. But the incident had marked all of them. Marcus had been quietly reassigned to a desk job. Rachel and the others had finished their tours under a cloud of suspicion, their military careers effectively over. The tattoo was Johnson's idea, Rachel continued. He said we needed something to mark what we'd done, not because we were proud of breaking the rules, but because we were proud of saving lives. The design had been carefully chosen. The eagle represented their military service, their commitment to their country. But instead of the traditional symbols of war, it carried the red cross of medical aid, of healing, of the choice they had made to prioritize saving lives over following orders. 7 of us got matching tattoos at a shop in Kabul, Rachel said. We swore we'd never regret what we did, no matter what happened afterward. Marcus touched his own tattoo again. I never have regretted it. Not for a single day. Tommy got his the day before the bombing. Rachel's voice grew quiet. He was so excited about it. Said it made him feel like he belonged to something important. The bombing that killed Private Martinez had happened 3 weeks after the rescue mission, a mortar attack on the base that caught everyone by surprise. Tommy had been on duty at the communications post when the shell hit. He died instantly, the medics said. No suffering. I was the one who had to write the letter to his parents, Marcus said. Hardest thing I've ever done. How do you explain to a mother that her 19-year-old son died carrying the weight of choices made by adults? You tell her that he died as a hero, Rachel said simply. Because that's exactly what he was. They sat in silence for several more minutes, both lost in memories of friends who had scattered across the globe and one who would never age beyond 19. The coffee shop around them filled with the evening crowd, but they remained in their own private world of shared experience. Do you ever wonder about the others? Rachel asked. Williams, Davis, Rodriguez? Whether they're okay? Marcus nodded. Every day. Johnson sends me a card every Christmas, just a simple note saying he's alive and well. Last I heard, he was working construction in Montana. But the others, I've never been able to find them. Maybe that's okay, Rachel said. Maybe some things are meant to stay in the past. But even as she said it, both of them knew that the past had a way of finding you when you least expected it. Their chance meeting at the hospital proved that some connections were too strong to be broken by time or distance. 6 months had passed since that emotional reunion in the coffee shop, and Marcus found himself looking forward to his monthly medical appointments in a way he never had before. What had started as a chance encounter had evolved into a friendship that filled a void in both their lives that neither had fully realized existed. Rachel had become more than just his physician assistant. She had become a bridge to a part of himself he had thought was buried forever. Their conversations during his appointments were carefully professional when other staff members were around, but there was an understanding between them that went deeper than words. On a warm spring afternoon, Marcus arrived at the hospital for what would be his final routine checkup. At 65, he was finally healthy enough that Dr. Chen had declared he only needed to come in annually unless problems arose. As he walked through the familiar corridors, he felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Colonel Henderson, Rachel greeted him with the same warm smile she had worn during all their encounters. Ready for your graduation day? Marcus chuckled. I suppose. Though I have to admit, I'll miss our monthly chats. Dr. Chen's examination went smoothly. And soon Marcus found himself with a clean bill of health and instructions to enjoy his retirement. As he prepared to leave, Rachel appeared beside him with a small envelope. Before you go, she said quietly, there's something I want to give you. Marcus opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph he hadn't seen in 15 years, all 7 members of their group standing outside the tattoo parlor in Kabul. They were dusty and tired, but their faces showed a mixture of pride and solemnity that captured exactly how they had felt that day. Johnson sent this to me last month, Rachel explained. Apparently he's been carrying it in his wallet all these years. He tracked down my address through the VA database. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. Marcus, there's something else. I've been in contact with the others. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. The others? Rachel nodded, pulling out her phone. It started with Johnson reaching out to me, but then we found Williams through social media. He's a police officer in Texas now. Davis is teaching high school history in Oregon. And Rodriguez, she smiled. Rodriguez is a paramedic in California. He says the injury you all saved him from motivated him to dedicate his life to emergency medicine. The news hit Marcus like a physical force. After 15 years of wondering, of carrying the weight of not knowing whether his decisions had destroyed their lives or saved them, he finally had answers. "They're all doing well," Rachel continued. "Different careers, different states, but they're all okay. And Marcus? They all want to see you again." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the waiting room chairs, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through him. "I don't know what to say. After all these years, I wasn't sure any of them would want to." "Want to what? See the man who saved their friends' lives?" Rachel sat down beside him. "Marcus, you've been carrying guilt about that night that belongs to all of us equally. We all made the choice to go. You just gave us permission to do what we already knew was right." Over the following weeks, Rachel had become the unofficial coordinator for what she jokingly called Operation Reunion. Phone calls were made, emails were exchanged, and slowly, carefully, the 5 surviving members of their group began to reconnect. The first video call had been awkward, with everyone talking over each other and struggling with 15 years of accumulated distance. But gradually, the old familiarity returned. Williams still had his dry sense of humor. Davis was still the intellectual of the group, now channeling his analytical mind into teaching young people about history and critical thinking. Rodriguez had maintained the quiet intensity that had made him such an effective soldier, now focused on saving civilian lives rather than fellow troops. And Johnson, predictably, had been the one to suggest they all meet in person. "Tommy would have wanted us to do this," he had said during one of their calls. "He always talked about how we were like family. Real family doesn't disappear just because times get tough." The reunion was planned for the anniversary of Tommy's death, not as a morbid memorial, but as a celebration of the bond that his memory had helped forge between them. They decided to meet in Colorado, close to where Marcus and Rachel lived, at a small cabin that Johnson had rented in the mountains. On the designated weekend, Marcus found himself more nervous than he had been since his first day of command. 15 years was a long time. People changed. Perspectives shifted. What if the connection that had felt so strong over video calls dissolved when they were face to face? Rachel picked him up early that Saturday morning, sensing his anxiety without him having to say anything. "You know," she said as they drove up the winding mountain road, "I've been thinking about something Tommy said the night before he got his tattoo." "What was that?" "He said that sometimes the most important choices you make aren't the ones that feel good at the time, but the ones that feel right." Rachel glanced over at Marcus. That night at FOB Lightning didn't feel good. Breaking protocol, risking court-martial, putting ourselves in danger, none of that felt good. But it felt right. When they arrived at the cabin, the others were already there. The years had changed them all. Gray hair, a few more lines around the eyes, the softness that comes with civilian life. But Marcus recognized each of them immediately. More importantly, he saw in their faces the same thing he felt in his own heart: relief, joy, and a sense of coming home. The weekend was filled with stories, laughter, and a few tears. They talked about their families, their careers, the paths their lives had taken since that deployment ended. Williams showed pictures of his daughters, both now in college. Davis talked about his students and how teaching had helped him process some of his own experiences. Rodriguez shared stories from the ambulance, how he carried the lessons they had all learned about teamwork and quick decision-making into his civilian career. But it was Johnson who provided the weekend's most meaningful moment. On Sunday morning, as they prepared to part ways again, he pulled out a small wooden box. "I've been carrying this for 15 years, he said, opening it to reveal Tommy's dog tags and a folded piece of paper. "Tommy wrote this letter the day he got his tattoo. He gave it to me and asked me to read it if anything ever happened to him." With shaky hands, Johnson unfolded the letter and began to read. "If you're reading this, it means I'm not coming home. But I want you all to know that I'm not scared about that. What we did, breaking the rules to save our guys, showed me what real courage looks like. It's not about following orders or doing what's safe. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I'm proud to wear this tattoo because it means I was part of something bigger than myself. Take care of each other and don't ever regret the choices we made. Love, Tommy. There wasn't a dry eye among them as Johnson finished reading. They stood in a circle on the cabin's deck, overlooking the Colorado mountains. And for a moment, it was as if Tommy was there with them, 19 years old and full of the wisdom that comes from facing impossible choices with integrity. "So what now?" Williams asked after they had all composed themselves. "Now we stay in touch," Marcus said firmly. "No more 15-year gaps. We're family, like Tommy said. Family doesn't disappear." They made plans for annual reunions, committed to regular video calls, and exchanged contact information with the understanding that this time they wouldn't let silence separate them again. As Marcus and Rachel drove back down the mountain that afternoon, both of them felt lighter than they had in years. The weight of unspoken guilt, of wondering what if, had finally been lifted. "Thank you," Marcus said as they reached the city limits, "for all of this, for finding them, for bringing us together." Rachel smiled. "Thank you for making the choice that started it all, for showing us that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do." 6 months later, Marcus received an invitation that brought tears to his eyes. Rachel was getting married to a fellow veteran she had met through her work at the hospital. The invitation was simple, but the handwritten note at the bottom meant everything. "I wouldn't have found the courage to open my heart to love again if you hadn't shown me what real family looks like. Will you walk me down the aisle? Your soldier, Rachel." At the wedding, Marcus looked out at the congregation and saw Williams, Davis, Rodriguez, and Johnson sitting in the front row, all of them beaming with pride. Tommy's photograph sat in a place of honor at the altar, and Rachel wore a pendant around her neck, a small eagle carrying a red cross, the symbol of choices made with courage and love. As Marcus walked Rachel down the aisle, he thought about the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. From a dusty outpost in Afghanistan to a hospital in Denver to a mountain cabin where old bonds were renewed, their story had come full circle. The tattoos they carried were no longer just reminders of a night when they had broken the rules. They had become symbols of the truth that real family is chosen, not born, and that some connections are strong enough to survive anything, even 15 years of silence. In his pocket, Marcus carried a letter of his own, one he had written to Tommy the night before the wedding. He planned to leave it at the veterans' cemetery the next day, finally saying the words he had carried for so long. "We kept faith with each other, son, and we never forgot."